The glass-walled corner office on the 47th floor of downtown's tallest skyscraper offered a breathtaking view of the city, but Michael Chen barely noticed it anymore. Instead, his eyes were fixed on the computer screen in front of him, reading yet another anonymous complaint about the workplace culture at Tech Vision Solutions. "Another talented employee quit today," he muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. The company he had built from scratch 15 years ago had grown beyond his wildest dreams, now employing over 500 people. But with that growth came problems he never expected to face. The morning sun cast long shadows across his desk as he scrolled through the company's internal feedback portal. The comments made his heart sink. Toxic environment. Management treats us like dirt. If you're not in the inner circle, you might as well be invisible. Michael leaned back in his chair, remembering the early days when Tech Vision was just 10 people working out of a cramped office, sharing pizza during late-night coding sessions. They were like family then. Now, he barely knew any faces beyond his executive team. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Sir, the quarterly management meeting starts in 5 minutes. "Thanks," he replied, but didn't move. Instead, he found himself watching the cleaning staff through his office windows as they quietly went about their work. Nobody seemed to notice them. They were like shadows moving through the office, invisible to the busy employees rushing past with their coffee cups and laptops. The latest complaint particularly bothered him. A junior developer had written about how a group of senior managers had taken credit for their team's work, then excluded them from an important client presentation. When the project won an industry award, these same managers didn't even mention their team's contribution. Michael pulled up the company's performance metrics on his screen. On paper, everything looked perfect. Profits were up, projects were being delivered on time, and client satisfaction was high. But something was rotting beneath the surface. He clicked through to the HR dashboard. Employee turnover had doubled in the past year, especially among junior staff and support personnel. Exit interviews showed a pattern, but people were afraid to name names or provide specific examples. They feared being blacklisted in the industry. Standing up, Michael walked to the window and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, the city was coming to life, streams of people flowing into office buildings like ants. Many of them probably faced similar situations in their workplaces, but he had the power to do something about it, at least in his company. His eyes fell on a janitor pushing a cleaning cart into the executive bathroom. The man kept his head down, almost as if trying to make himself invisible. Something clicked in Michael's mind. He pulled out his phone and called the one person he knew he could trust with what he was about to do. "Linda, it's Michael. Can you come to my office? And please don't tell anyone about what we're going to discuss." Linda from HR arrived within minutes, looking concerned. "Everything okay, Michael?" He gestured for her to sit down and took a deep breath. "I need your help with something unusual, very unusual, and it needs to stay between us." As he outlined his plan, Linda's eyes widened. "You want to do what? Michael, that's crazy. You're the CEO." "Exactly," he replied, a determined look in his eyes. "I'm the CEO, and I've lost touch with what's really happening in my company. The only way to fix this is to see it from ground level. No filters, no prepared presentations, no polished reports. I need to experience what our employees experience every day." Linda shook her head, but he could see she was starting to understand. "This could either be the bravest thing you've ever done or the craziest." "Maybe both," Michael smiled, already thinking about the logistics. "But something needs to change, and it needs to start with me understanding the truth." As the morning sun climbed higher over the city, Michael Chen began planning how he would transform himself from a CEO into a janitor. What he didn't know was that this decision would change not just his company, but his entire perspective on leadership, dignity, and human nature. The small makeup studio tucked away in a quiet part of town wasn't the kind of place Michael usually visited. But today, he sat quietly in the chair as May, a talented makeup artist known for her work in theater, studied his face with intense concentration. "Hold still," she said, gently applying layers of makeup that would age his skin and add subtle imperfections. "When I'm done, your own mother wouldn't recognize you." Michael watched in the mirror as his appearance slowly transformed. His usually well-groomed face gained wrinkles around the eyes, Sunspots appeared on his cheeks, and his skin tone changed slightly. May even added a small scar near his eyebrow. "Everyone has a story," she explained. Next door, in a small wardrobe room, Linda from HR was sorting through clothes from secondhand stores. They had agreed that everything needed to look worn but clean, the clothes of someone who took pride in themselves despite limited means. "Try these," Linda said, handing him a pile of clothes. The faded blue work shirt had seen better days, and the khaki pants were slightly frayed at the cuffs. The shoes were sturdy but scuffed work boots, comfortable enough for someone who would be on their feet all day. As Michael changed, he practiced the way he would walk. No more confident stride. He needed to be less noticeable, more hunched, like someone trying to blend into the background. He thought about the cleaning staff he'd watched from his office, how they moved efficiently but almost invisibly through the building. "Now for your new identity," Linda said, holding up a folder. "You're Mark Santos, 45 years old, recently moved to the city after your previous job ended. Single, lives in an apartment across town, takes the bus to work. We've arranged everything through a temp agency that regularly supplies our cleaning staff." Michael practiced speaking with a slight accent, making his voice a bit rougher. They had chosen this background carefully, common enough not to draw attention, but with enough detail to feel real if anyone asked questions. "Remember," Linda warned, "most people won't ask. From what we've seen, they'd barely notice the cleaning staff at all." Her words stung, but Michael knew they were true. He'd been guilty of the same behavior himself, hadn't he? They spent hours practicing his new persona. How to use the cleaning equipment properly. Linda had brought in a real janitor to train him secretly over the weekend. How to respond to requests, where to eat lunch, which entrance to use, even how to clock in and out. "The key is consistency," the trainer had told him. "People might not notice you, but they'll notice if you do something wrong." Back in the makeup chair for final touches, Michael looked at his reflection and barely recognized himself. May had even changed his hair, making it grayer and thinner. She showed him how to apply the basic makeup himself. He would need to do touch-ups daily to maintain the disguise. "What about your family?" Linda asked suddenly. "Won't they wonder where you are all day?" Michael had thought this through. "I told them I'm working on a special project that will keep me busy. They're used to my long hours. Still, it hurt knowing he wouldn't be able to have lunch with his daughter or help his son with homework for the next few weeks." As evening approached, Michael, now Mark, stood at the bus stop near the studio, wearing his new identity like an ill-fitting suit. Tomorrow would be his first day. A woman in expensive business clothes hurried past, not even glancing his way. Just hours ago, he would have been the one rushing past without a second look. The bus arrived, crowded with tired workers heading home. Michael found a seat near the back, already feeling different in his new skin. He watched the city roll by through grimy windows, thinking about how many stories were happening around him that he'd never noticed before. His phone buzzed, a text from Linda. "Remember, if anything goes wrong, just get out. We can always find another way." But Michael knew there was no going back now. He needed to understand what was happening in his company, and this was the only way to see the unfiltered truth. As the bus rumbled toward his temporary apartment, he rehearsed his new identity one more time, preparing himself for whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning air was still dark and crisp when Mark arrived for his first day. He joined a small group of cleaning staff gathering near the service entrance, all of them clutching thermoses of coffee and wearing similar worn work clothes. A few nodded hello, but most kept to themselves, tired eyes focused on the ground. "New guy, right?" An older man with kind eyes introduced himself as Pete. "Let me show you around before the office people start coming in. That's when things get busy." His voice carried years of experience, and Mark felt grateful for the guidance. Pete walked him through the building's service areas, supply closets, break rooms, and maintenance corridors Mark had never known existed, despite owning the building. "Remember to keep your cart stocked," Pete advised. "You don't want to be running back and forth for supplies when the suits are around." As they worked, Pete shared unwritten rules, which bathrooms needed extra attention, which floors were the messiest, and most importantly, which managers were known for making their jobs harder. "Fourth floor's the worst," Pete whispered. "Those tech guys think they're too important to use trash cans." Around 8 a.m., the office began filling with employees. Mark kept his head down as instructed, pushing his cart from room to room. The morning cleaning routine felt endless, emptying trash bins, wiping surfaces, and cleaning bathrooms. His back already ached from bending and lifting. He witnessed his first incident before lunch. A group of marketing executives spilled coffee in the break room, laughing as they walked away. "Someone will clean it up," one said loudly. That someone was Mark, who had to stop his regular tasks to mop up the mess. During lunch break, Mark sat in the small basement room designated for cleaning staff. The contrast with his usual executive dining room was stark. Pete shared his sandwich, explaining that he always packed extra just in case. Other cleaners discussed their second jobs, family struggles, and dreams they were putting on hold. The afternoon brought more revelations. He overheard conversations that made his stomach turn. Managers bragging about denying promotions, making fun of junior staff's appearances, planning to take credit for others' work. All while ignoring Mark completely, as if he were part of the furniture. In one meeting room, he pretended to dust while listening to a team meeting. A young programmer was presenting an innovative solution, only to have her manager interrupt and dismiss her ideas without consideration. Mark recognized the manager, someone he'd promoted last year based on impressive performance reports. The day's lowest point came when he was cleaning the executive bathrooms, his own private bathroom. Two senior managers walked in, discussing bonus distributions. "Keep the pool small," one said. "Tell the rest they didn't meet metrics. They can't verify the numbers anyway." They noticed Mark but continued talking, confident that a mere janitor wouldn't understand or matter. By day's end, Mark's body ached, but his mind was racing. He'd seen more truth about his company in one day than in months of reports and meetings. He watched the evening cleaning crew arrive for their shift, remembering how he used to wonder why the office was always clean without ever thinking about the people who made it happen. On the bus ride home, still in character as Mark, an executive from his company sat next to him, but quickly moved when another seat opened up. It was someone he'd had lunch with just last week. The irony wasn't lost on him. Back in his temporary apartment, removing the makeup that transformed him into Mark, Michael thought about everything he'd witnessed. The casual cruelty, the invisible barriers, the assumption that some people mattered less than others, it was all happening under his nose. He took out a notebook and began writing everything down, his hand shaking slightly. This wasn't just about catching a few bad managers anymore. His company had developed an entire culture of disrespect that went far deeper than he'd imagined. As he set his alarm for another early morning, Michael realized that his real work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, and he needed to be ready for them. But one thing was already clear: his company needed more than just a few policy changes. It needed a complete transformation. 3 weeks into his undercover role, Mark had become a familiar sight in the building's hallways, though hardly anyone ever looked at him twice. He'd settled into a routine, learned which floors needed attention at what times, and built a quiet friendship with Pete and the other cleaning staff. But today was different. Today was when everything started to get worse. It began in the morning meeting room on the 4th floor. A group of middle managers were having their weekly catch-up, leaving behind not just coffee cups and pastry crumbs, but also their laptops and documents scattered across the table. Mark entered quietly with his cleaning cart, waiting for them to leave as usual. "Oh look, it's our cleaning friend," one of the managers said, smirking. He was wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Mark's supposed monthly salary. "Hey buddy, make sure you get all the crumbs this time. Yesterday I found some on my chair." Mark nodded politely and began collecting the trash. He recognized the manager as Tom from product development, someone he'd hired 2 years ago. Tom had seemed promising then. Now he watched as the man deliberately dropped his half-eaten donut on the floor. "Oops," Tom laughed, nudging his colleagues. "Butterfingers. Better get that too." The other managers joined in the laughter, except for one young woman who looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Mark bent down to clean the mess, his face burning with a mixture of anger and shame. He thought about the thousands of decisions he'd made as CEO, including the promotions of everyone in this room. Later that afternoon, things escalated. Mark was cleaning the men's room when 3 managers walked in, including Tom. They stopped their conversation abruptly upon seeing him, then Tom grinned. "Hey guys, watch this." He proceeded to throw paper towels on the floor, one by one, watching Mark pick them up. "You missed a spot," another manager chimed in, pointing to a corner. When Mark went to clean it, they laughed harder. "These people, I swear they can barely understand English. Where'd you get your education?" The dumpster behind the building. Mark kept his head down, his hands shaking slightly as he collected the paper towels. He thought about his real office upstairs, the degrees on his wall, the awards his company had won for innovation and leadership. The irony was almost too much to bear. The bullying continued throughout the day. They would walk past his cleaning cart and knock things over accidentally. They made loud comments about his clothes, his accent, even the way he walked. Each incident was carefully noted in the small notebook he kept in his pocket. During his lunch break, he sat with Pete in their usual corner of the basement break room. Pete noticed his silence. "They giving you trouble up there?" Mark nodded, surprised by the lump in his throat. Pete sighed, pulling out an extra cookie from his lunch bag. "Been here 15 years, he said quietly. "Some of them that need to make others feel small to feel big themselves. Don't let them get to you." But it wasn't just the direct bullying that bothered Mark. It was watching how these managers treated everyone they considered beneath them. He saw them take credit for their team's work, blame junior staff for their own mistakes, and create an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. At the end of that difficult day, as Mark was finishing up his evening rounds, he found a note taped to his cleaning cart. "Maybe if you learned to clean properly, you wouldn't be a janitor forever." The handwriting matched Tom's signature from company documents. On the bus ride home, still in his Mark disguise, he thought about every person who had ever worked under these managers. How many talented employees had they driven away? How many good ideas had been crushed? How many dreams had been mocked? Back in his temporary apartment, removing his disguise, Michael made a decision. He'd seen enough. The problem wasn't just a few bad managers, it was a culture of cruelty that he had allowed to grow unchecked. Opening his notebook, he began to plan what would become the most important meeting in his company's history. He had come looking for problems, but he'd found something far worse. A complete failure of leadership, starting with himself. As he prepared for bed, he knew that tomorrow would bring more bullying, more insults, more degradation. But now, each incident would be another nail in the coffin of this toxic culture he was determined to end. As days turned into weeks, Mark became a silent witness to the deeper problems plaguing his company. Like a hidden camera, he observed patterns that would never have been visible from his executive office. Each day brought new revelations that made his heart sink further. One morning, he was cleaning near the software development team's area when he overheard a conversation that made him stop in his tracks. A young programmer was excitedly showing his team leader a new feature he'd developed over the weekend. The innovation could save the company thousands of hours of manual work. "Good job," the team leader said, taking the USB drive with the code. "I'll present this to the board next week." The young programmer's face fell slightly, knowing he wouldn't get credit, but he just nodded and returned to his desk. Mark watched as the team leader later told other managers it was his own idea. In another incident, he was emptying trash bins when he found torn pieces of a report. Curiosity made him piece them together in the maintenance room. It was a harassment complaint against one of the senior managers, deliberately buried by HR. The same manager who had been promoted twice in the past year. During lunch breaks, Mark would sit with the other cleaning staff, listening to their stories. Many worked second jobs to make ends meet. One elderly cleaner named Rose had worked in the building for 20 years but couldn't afford to retire. "At least the health insurance is good," she would say with a tired smile. The most disturbing patterns emerged in the executive meeting rooms. As Mark cleaned around them, carefully invisible, he witnessed senior managers plotting to manipulate project timelines, take credit for subordinates' work, and even deliberately sabotage promising junior employees who they saw as threats. "Keep him off the client presentation," one manager whispered to another. "He's too good, might make us look bad." Said he's not ready yet. The other manager nodded, both of them ignoring Mark as he wiped down their table. In the break room, he watched as a group of managers laughed about denying a young mother's request for flexible hours. "She should choose between being a mom and having a career," one said, dropping his coffee cup on the floor for Mark to clean up. The tech support team, hidden away in the basement, shared their own stories during quiet moments. They were treated like machinery, called upon when needed, ignored when not, blamed when things went wrong, and never thanked when things went right. One day, Mark found a junior accountant crying in the stairwell. She had discovered some questionable expense reports from senior management, but was told to mind her own business when she raised concerns. Mark pretended to mop the stairs while listening to her story, his anger growing with each detail. The pattern was clear. There were two companies existing in the same building. One was the shiny, successful tech firm featured in business magazines. The other was a shadow company full of ignored voices, stolen ideas, and crushed spirits. During a late evening shift, Mark was cleaning the executive floor when he found a presentation left open on a laptop. It detailed plans to outsource the entire cleaning staff to cut costs, despite record profits. The same managers who treated him like dirt were planning to fire Pete, Rose, and all the others who kept the building running. In his small apartment that night, Michael removed his disguise with trembling hands. His notebook was now full of documented incidents, dates, names, and patterns of behavior. The problem wasn't just a few bad managers, it was systematic. A culture of disrespect and exploitation had taken root while he sat in his top-floor office, believing everything was fine. He thought about Rose's tired smile, the young programmer's stolen idea, the crying accountant, and Pete's daily kindness. They deserved better. Everyone deserved better. As he stared at his reflection, slowly transforming back from Mark to Michael, he knew what he had to do. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would be the day the invisible became visible and the voiceless would finally be heard. But first, he had one more day of evidence to gather. And it would turn out to be the worst day of all. The company event was supposed to be a celebration of another successful quarter. The main conference room buzzed with excitement as employees gathered for the afternoon party. Colorful balloons decorated the space, and tables were laden with expensive catering. Mark watched from the corner, pushing his cleaning cart quietly along the walls. "Hey, cleaning guy." Tom's voice cut through the chatter. He was standing with his usual group of managers, all holding champagne glasses. "We've got a special job for you." The smirk on his face made Mark's stomach tighten. As if rehearsed, one of the managers accidentally knocked over a full plate of chocolate cake and strawberries. The dessert splattered across the cream-colored carpet, creating a dark, sticky mess. The group erupted in laughter. "Better clean that up quick," Tom called out, loud enough for nearby groups to hear. "Wouldn't want anyone to slip." More people turned to watch, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but remaining silent. Mark reached for his cleaning supplies, but Tom wasn't finished. "Wait," he said, walking over with his champagne glass. "This carpet looks a bit dry over here too." He tilted his glass, letting the golden liquid spill onto the clean section of the carpet. The crowd had grown larger now. Some junior employees were recording the scene on their phones, probably for social media. Mark could feel dozens of eyes on him as he knelt to clean the growing mess. "Look at him," one manager laughed. "This is probably the highlight of his career. Maybe we should make more messes, give him some job security." Pete appeared suddenly with additional cleaning supplies, trying to help, but Tom blocked his path. No, let our friend handle this alone. We want to see if he's worth what we pay him." As Mark scrubbed the carpet, memories flashed through his mind. Signing the lease for this building, choosing this very carpet, approving the promotion of every person who now stood watching his humiliation. The irony was almost unbearable. Someone in the crowd started making bets on whether he could remove the stains. Others joined in, turning his work into a spectacle. $20 says he misses a spot. 30 says he starts crying. The young programmer whose idea had been stolen stepped forward to help, but was quickly pulled back by his team leader. "Don't get involved," the leader whispered, but loud enough for Mark to hear. Rose watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. She'd seen this kind of behavior before, but never so public, never so cruel. Mark caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod, telling her to stay back. This was a moment he needed to experience fully. As he worked, he could hear Tom and his friends discussing him as if he weren't there. They mocked his clothes, made up stories about his background, joked about his future. "Bet he'll be cleaning toilets until he dies," one laughed. The whole scene lasted perhaps 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. When Mark finally finished cleaning the carpet, Leaving it spotless, Tom slow clapped. Bravo. This calls for a celebration. He reached for another glass of champagne. But before he could create another mess, Linda from HR pushed through the crowd. That's enough, she said firmly, her eyes meeting Mark's briefly. She knew this was the breaking point they'd been waiting for. The party slowly resumed, people drifting away from the scene, some looking ashamed, others still amused. Mark quietly packed his cleaning supplies, his hands steady despite his racing heart. He'd seen everything he needed to see. In the maintenance room, Pete found him later. I'm sorry, the older man said quietly. You didn't deserve that. None of us do. Mark placed a hand on Pete's shoulder. No, we don't, he agreed, his voice different now, more assured. And things are about to change. That evening, as he removed his disguise for the last time, Michael Chen looked at his reflection and saw both Mark and himself, the CEO who had let this happen and the janitor who had experienced it firsthand. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the masks would come off. He picked up his phone and called Linda. Schedule an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning, he said. It's time. The main conference hall was packed the next morning. Employees whispered among themselves, wondering why there was an emergency all-hands meeting. Tom and his group of managers stood near the front, coffee cups in hand, looking annoyed at the early start. Linda stepped onto the stage first. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin, I need all exits to remain clear and phones to be switched off. She nodded to security personnel positioned at each door. The room hummed with curiosity. The side door opened, and Mark the janitor walked in, pushing his cleaning cart. Several managers snickered. Tom leaned over to his friend, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. What's the cleaning staff doing here? Don't they know this is for real employees? Mark pushed his cart to the center of the stage. The room fell silent as he turned to face the crowd. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and began peeling away the makeup that had been his disguise for the past month. Gasps filled the room as Michael Chen's face emerged. Good morning, he said, his voice no longer carrying Mark's accent. For those who don't recognize me without my suit, I'm Michael Chen, CEO of this company. The silence in the room became deafening. Tom's coffee cup slipped from his hand, spilling across the floor. Michael picked up a remote and clicked. The screen behind him came to life, showing video clips from hidden cameras. For the past month, I've worked as a janitor in our building. I've seen and experienced things that shame me as a leader and as a human being. The screen showed clips of stolen ideas, buried complaints, cruel pranks, and countless moments of workplace bullying. Each scene was time-stamped and clearly showed the faces of those involved. Some people in the audience began to sink in their seats. Yesterday's party was eye-opening, Michael continued, playing the footage of Tom and his friends creating deliberate messes. But it was just the tip of the iceberg. More clips played, managers taking credit for others' work, deliberately sabotaging junior employees, making discriminatory comments. He walked to the edge of the stage. I thought I was running a company of innovation and respect. Instead, I found a culture of cruelty and fear. And that stops today. Tom stepped forward, his face red. Sir, we were just joking around. If we'd known it was you. That's exactly the point, Michael cut him off. You shouldn't treat anyone that way, regardless of their position. The fact that you would have behaved differently if you knew I was CEO makes it worse, not better. Michael then began calling out names. 23 managers and senior staff members were asked to stand. Over the past month, I've documented multiple incidents of workplace harassment, discrimination, and ethical violations from each of you. Security will escort you to HR to process your immediate termination. The room erupted in murmurs as security began leading the stunned managers out. But Michael wasn't finished. He turned to the screen, which now showed pictures of Pete, Rose, and other cleaning staff members. These are the people who keep our company running. They deserve the same respect as any executive. From today, our cleaning staff will be brought in-house with full benefits and fair wages. He clicked again, and new images appeared. The young programmer whose idea was stolen, the accountant who found suspicious reports, the team members who were silenced. These employees showed integrity despite facing pressure to do otherwise. They're our new management team. Looking across the silent room, Michael stepped down from the stage. I failed you all by allowing this culture to develop. But starting today, this company changes. Every voice matters. Every person has value. And anyone who doesn't understand that has no place here." He walked to where Pete stood near the back. "Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like," he said, shaking the older man's hand. "Would you consider joining our board of directors? We need your wisdom." The room broke into applause, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Tears streamed down Rose's face as Linda handed her a new contract with triple her previous salary. The young programmer stood straighter, finally seen and valued. As Michael watched the room transform from fear to hope, he knew this was just the beginning. Real change would take time, but the masks were off now. There was no going back. The days following the dramatic revelation brought massive changes to the company. The office buzzed with a different kind of energy now. The fear was gone, replaced by something new: hope. In the main lobby, workers were taking down the old mission statement that had hung there for years. Michael stood watching as they installed the new one. Every person matters. Simple words, but now they had real meaning. The changes started immediately. The first order of business was clearing out the offices of the terminated managers. Michael watched as their fancy nameplates came down. Inside one office, he found a drawer full of employee suggestions that had never been read. Another contained performance reviews that had been manipulated to deny promotions. "What should we do with all this?" asked Linda, holding up files of buried complaints. "Make copies," Michael replied. "These are lessons we can't forget." He picked up a framed award for excellence in management from Tom's desk and dropped it in the recycling bin. The young programmer, whose idea had been stolen now, sat in his former manager's office, looking almost uncomfortable with the space. "Sir," he said when Michael visited, "are you sure about this promotion?" Michael smiled, remembering how this same young man had been mocked just days ago. "You earned this through your work, your integrity, and your ideas. The only mistake was not giving it to you sooner." In the basement, the cleaning staff's old break room was being renovated. Rose cried when she saw her new office. She would now be heading facilities management. "I never thought," she started, but couldn't finish through her tears. Pete's first act as board member was to create a ground-level committee, a group that would regularly work alongside frontline staff to understand their challenges. No more ivory tower decisions, he announced at his first meeting. But not everything was smooth sailing. Some employees struggled to adapt to the new culture. A few resigned, uncomfortable with the increased transparency and accountability. "That's okay," Michael told Linda. "Change isn't for everyone." The most touching moment came when the young accountant who had found the suspicious expense reports was promoted to head of financial compliance. "Your integrity cost you before," Michael told her. "Now it's your greatest asset." The physical changes to the building reflected the cultural shift. Gone were the separate break rooms and restricted areas. The executive floor was converted into common spaces where anyone could work or meet. Even Michael moved his office to a more accessible location. One morning, Michael arrived early to find Pete teaching a group of executives how to properly clean their own workspaces. "Part of the new training program," Pete explained with a grin. "Everyone needs to understand and respect all types of work." The company's client meetings changed too. Instead of just executives presenting, team members at all levels were encouraged to share their contributions. The young programmer's innovative feature, now properly credited, became a major selling point. HR introduced new policies, anonymous feedback systems, regular town halls, and a zero-tolerance approach to workplace bullying. But more importantly, they created paths for career growth at all levels. The security guard who had always wanted to learn coding was now enrolled in programming classes, paid for by the company. Rose's first act as facilities manager was to ensure all cleaning staff had proper equipment and fair schedules. "No more invisible workers," she declared. "We're all part of the same team." The most significant change was in the small, daily interactions. People held doors open for each other. Names were learned. Thank yous were genuine. The cleaning staff received smiles and greetings instead of being ignored. Michael kept Mark's old cleaning cart in his office as a reminder. Sometimes, when facing a difficult decision, he would look at it and ask himself, what would this look like from ground level? 1 month after the revelation, Michael stood in his new office, watching the sunrise over the city. On his desk sat the day's schedule: a morning meeting with Pete about worker conditions, lunch with Rose to discuss facility improvements, and an afternoon session with the young programmer about his latest innovation. The company was different now. Not perfect, but better. Real change was happening, one day at a time. 6 months had passed since the day Michael revealed his true identity. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the company's main hall, where employees gathered for their monthly town hall meeting. The atmosphere was completely different from that dramatic morning half a year ago. "Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high," Linda announced from the stage, beaming at the crowd. "But more importantly, look around you. This is what a healthy workplace looks like." She was right. The room was filled with genuine smiles and comfortable conversation. The old hierarchy that had divided people was gone. A cleaning staff member sat next to a senior developer, both engaged in friendly chat about their weekend plans. The company's success story had spread beyond its walls. Business magazines wanted interviews about the transformation. Other CEOs called for advice. But Michael's favorite moment came when a small business owner visited to learn about their culture change. The trick, Michael told him, wasn't just firing the bad managers. It was rebuilding from the ground up. He showed the visitor their new initiatives: the quarterly program where executives worked entry-level jobs, the open door policy that actually meant something, the career development programs available to everyone. Pete's ground-level committee had become a model for other companies. "You can't leave what you don't understand," he would say during presentations. His simple wisdom had transformed how decisions were made. Every major company change now required input from those it would affect most. Rose had revolutionized the facilities department. Cleanup was now everyone's responsibility, from interns to executives. "When you clean your own mess," she would say, "you learn to make less of it." The building sparkled not because of overworked cleaners, but because everyone pitched in. The young programmer whose idea had been stolen was now heading his own team. His leadership style was different. He made sure every team member's contribution was recognized and rewarded. His latest project had doubled the company's efficiency. The accountant who had found the suspicious reports had created a new financial transparency system. "Numbers don't lie," she would say, "and neither do we." Her system became so successful that other companies started adopting it. But the real transformation was in the small things. The security guard who had started coding classes was now a junior developer, still wearing his old uniform 1 day a week to remind himself and others where he came from. The cafeteria staff were treated with respect and knew everyone by name. Even the plants in the office seemed happier, cared for by everyone instead of being someone else's job. Michael kept his promise about working at different levels. Every month, he spent a day doing various jobs around the company. Sometimes he helped with coding, sometimes with cleaning, sometimes with customer service. "Every job has its challenges," he would say. "Every role deserves respect." The company's success soared, but not just in numbers. They became known for innovation because good ideas were heard regardless of who spoke them. They became known for quality because people took pride in their work at every level. They became known for customer service because happy employees naturally cared more about helping others. On this particular morning, Michael stood in the lobby, watching people arrive for work. A delivery person dropped off packages, and 3 different employees rushed to help them. A new employee looked lost, and immediately someone stepped up to show them around. The morning cleaning crew arrived to smiles and greetings instead of indifference. Near his office, Michael kept a wall of photographs, not of awards or achievements, but of people. Pete sharing lunch with new hires. Rose teaching executives how to properly mop a floor. The security guard turned developer helping others learn to code. Small moments that showed big changes. The last photo was from yesterday. The entire company gathered for a community service day, everyone wearing the same t-shirt, no way to tell who was who based on their position, and that was exactly the point. "Good morning, Michael," the receptionist called out cheerfully. "Don't forget you're helping with maintenance today." He smiled, heading toward the maintenance room where his old cleaning cart waited. Some lessons he had learned were worth repeating. Some changes needed constant tending like a garden, but the fruits of this labor were worth every effort. The company had become more than just a workplace, it had become a community. And in the end, that was the greatest transformation of all.